Our next guest wears a couple of different hats. He is the sheriff of Canyon County here in Idaho. Kieran Donahue is also the president of the State Sheriff's Association. And it caught my attention last week, and probably that of a lot of other people. I was looking through the Statesman one morning, and there was a guest commentary from him, and he was speaking about Idaho's new trespass law. I think he's raising some questions that a lot of people would like to consider, and maybe it could even lead to some clarification or revisions in that law. It's 6 minutes after 8 o'clock. We're at 61 on Magic Valley this morning with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And Sheriff Donahue, first of all, welcome to our program.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it.
The column, when I was reading it, about two-thirds of the way, I think I was through the column, and I came across something you pointed out, and you said that, and this I think would be a big concern for anyone in law enforcement, that at some point, if someone is arrested for violating the new law, and there's going to be some confusion about it, that individual who probably at that point might be a very innocent person is suddenly criminalized, and there could even be lawsuits that follow. And you made the point that the people who generally get sued in these situations are police officers and sheriff's deputies, law enforcement, but not necessarily the people who make the laws. And you feel that that should be a big concern, and that the legislature might or should consider maybe revisiting some of this.
Yes, you've nailed it. I mean, that's typically where that starts, the litigation process. And in addition to, this person, let's say this person innocently is charged with criminal trespass. When you're charged with something, you have to defend that, right? You're likely going to get an attorney. You're gonna pay money to defend it. And even if you're proven not guilty, you still have to pay that fee. You have to pay that lawyer's fee. There's no reimbursement on that thing. And so that adds another level for the innocent Idaho person who's out there hunting or fishing or recreating what they thought was on public lands and inadvertently moved into private land. So that's what's one aspect. And then, of course, we are the first ones that get sued on that, and it's not the legislative body that gets sued. It's not the sponsors of the bill that get sued or the backers of the bill that get sued. It's law enforcement, and that comes down to the county taxpayer at the end of the day, and our insurance and things of that nature. So there's a lot of problems with this bill, this law that's now been put in place, and I think we're just barely talking about the tip of the iceberg. I think, unfortunately, for Idaho citizens, we're going to see a majority of problems this fall, and I hope we don't, but I'm not that optimistic. I think we will throughout the state. I think it's going to come cascading down come January or when the legislative session takes place.
We really haven't seen, I think, the extent of it either, because at least the major hunting seasons haven't come along yet to any great degree. But when we get into the fall and you're going to have a lot more people out hunting, you're likely going to hear a lot more about this. And again, people inadvertently being on property. And that's where the front page headlines will start popping up, and maybe some more editorial concerns from not just you, but other people as well.
Yeah, that is exactly what one of my major concerns is right now in all sheriffs. My county doesn't have a rural area in terms of hunting like a lot of our sheriff's offices throughout the state. But the fact is, these people are going to be out hunting, and what they traditionally have done is not going to be acceptable, so to speak. I mean, traditionally you had landowners marking their property every 660 feet to show posting, no trespassing, no hunting, that sort of thing. This law has eliminated the majority of that, where it comes to the corners of a property, which could be miles and miles apart, and then conspicuous, I think is the terminology, conspicuous, where a reasonable person should know that this is private land. Well, in law enforcement, we certainly deal with a lot of unreasonable people, and what's reasonable to one person is certainly not reasonable to another. And so this confusion is just going to grow in intensity, in my opinion. And again, at the end of the day, it's the innocent people that are out utilizing our public lands, which is certainly their right to do so, and then inadvertently, and when we're talking about hunters or recreationists in that respect, and inadvertently potentially getting themselves in a bind.
That gets back to that point, too, about who they're going to hold responsible, because they look at law enforcement arresting them, or at least writing them the ticket, and they don't realize you have to respond to the complaint from the property owner.
That's absolutely true, and we do so, and rightfully so. That's our job, to enforce the law and to respond when called upon to any type of a situation. And of course, officers do have discretion, as you well know, and that's a positive thing. But unfortunately, I think there are those bad apples in every group in terms of people who are out there who maliciously and criminally trespass on a regular basis. They're a very small minority, but they do exist. And I think those problems with those individuals over the years have possibly created some of this hardship. But by and large, the majority of people out there, recreating and sportsmen, are very much law-abiding citizens. So certainly law enforcement is going to have the ability to look into that. But I think that there's additional problems that's going to come from all of this potential. We're not talking about just out in the wilderness areas and hunting. We're talking about right in town. You know, if your 14-year-old child throws a frisbee and goes over into the neighbor's yard, you know, by this law, that child, a juvenile, should wait until the landowner is back to get permission to come on there and retrieve that frisbee. Otherwise, he could be charged with criminal trespass. Well, how reasonable is that the 14-year-old is going to wait? Or if your dog goes over onto a person's property and you go and retrieve the dog, which you should, in my opinion, retrieve the dog. It shouldn't be over there. Now you're potentially going to be charged, or could be charged, with criminal trespass.
I know you had mentioned when you wrote the column that you didn't feel in the beginning anyway that legislators did much to consult law enforcement. I guess they brought you in late in the process, that perhaps, though, if they'd had more input, things might have worked out a little bit better.
I can tell you emphatically that law enforcement was barred from the conversation. I can tell you that we were completely left out on purpose, not by accident. And I can also tell you that it was only by us hammering away at the legislative body prior to some of those committee hearings that we even had our voices heard whatsoever. I can also tell you that all the sporting groups that I'm aware of were opposed to this bill. Hunting groups, sporting groups, recreationist groups. The governor was rebutted on this bill. We were completely left out of the conversation, and that is absolutely inappropriate, including the chiefs of police, the sheriffs, the very people who have to enforce law. We were completely kept out of this. So these ads that this coalition and legislative sponsors have put out, and the rhetoric that they put out into the newspapers, etc., is absolutely ridiculous, because we were completely left out, and that is the most inappropriate way to institute a law on the books. Law enforcement needs to be involved. We're the very people who have to go out and enforce it.
I could see how a lot of this, combined with some other new laws, could create some unforeseen problems. And I know most of these would likely never happen, but if someone had a breakdown and it's late at night and they're trying to find a shortcut so they can get to a gas station or somewhere for help, and then, you know, we've got a new law that is somewhat of a castle doctrine law. Somebody's on somebody's property. Nobody knows you could have some tragedies that could end up with all of these changes.
You're right once again, Bill, and that, I'm telling you, that really, really does concern us. Whether you're a backer of the castle doctrine, or opponent or proponent, the fact remains, law enforcement, and I'm going to start with that. With law enforcement, absolutely protects and supports the Constitution of the state of Idaho, the Constitution of the United States, every single day. We absolutely protect people's Second Amendment rights, without question. That's what we're there to do. But this combination of events where you have this bad law put in place, and you have the castle doctrine, the stand your ground law that's now on the books, you've got the potential for disaster, where if a person is on a property and the landowner, if something tragically happens, the landowner, in my opinion, is presented with a plausible defense. Well, I feared for my safety, I feared for this, I feared for that, and the person was trespassing. Well, the person could have innocently been trespassing, not knowing exactly where they were, and now you have this tragic event. what happens then? Even if the law is amended, which it should be on many facets in the legislative session coming up, you're not going to bring that person back. That's not going to rectify that tragedy.
Are you getting any response since the column that legislators, are they reaching out saying, okay, we'd like to talk about maybe at least fine tuning this?
Not yet, but I would expect that they will and should reach out to us. The legislative body, even the sponsors of the bill when this thing was passed, said, and I'm semi-quoting, I'm paraphrasing, we know that there's problems with the law. We're just going to have to fix it next year. Well, that's a ludicrous way to enact law. And we said that at the time. Why are we putting a law in the books that we know we're going to have to go back and fix? And that it was just this strong, just tremendously strong push to push this thing through, and it really overtook the whole session. There was many other very important bills that, in my opinion, got pushed to the side while we dealt with this bill. And I just think, again, that's just an improper way to enact law.
Wanted to tell anybody who's just tuning in, we're speaking with Canyon County Sheriff Kieran Donnelly. He's also president of the Idaho Sheriff's Association. It's 8:17 on Magic Valley this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you until 10 a.m. The sheriff's with us for a few more minutes this morning. I got a break in about 2 minutes, but before we get there, I talked to a legislator when this bill was finally, I guess, just ripe for passage, and the legislator, she told me, she said at the time, well, this is a compromise bill. This is the best we could do. I heard the word compromise, and they thought it was the best way to balance the needs of the sportsmen and the property owners. But I guess that goes back to what you were just saying. If it wasn't perfect, why pass it?
Well, if it wasn't perfect, why pass it at all? But I would question who this compromise was made with initially, especially at the very end of the day, at the very end of the session. There was a handful of legislators who took our very serious concerns to heart and said, well, maybe we do need to change this, maybe we do need to change that. But if the compromise that this person speaks of would have started from the very beginning, we would have had a whole different looking bill in front of us. You can't exclude the very people who are out there recreating and sportsmen, hunters, etc., and law enforcement and say you compromised and this is the best we could come up with. That's just an untrue statement.
We're speaking, by the way, with Sheriff Kieran Donahue from Canyon County. And again, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, he's the president of the Idaho Sheriff's Association. We have to take a short break. But, Sheriff, I understand you have a few more minutes you can give us, and
I do.
We can pick this back up on the other side of the break. In the meantime, just a quick note, too, as well. Coming up next Monday on the program, going to be joined by the good doctors from Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert. And they offer a lot of choices when it comes to hearing health care. Because, of course, it's an independent operation. Doctors Pickup and Mitchell pride themselves on caring for each individual with customized and personal treatment plans. Mount Harrison Audiology cares about your health goals and will work with you to provide the best care possible. Call Mount Harrison Audiology for your appointment today, 208-312-0957. That's 208-312-0957. It's 20 minutes after 8 o'clock. We're at 61 on Magic Valley this morning with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX. At newsradio1310.com. We've got a few more minutes with the president of the Idaho Sheriff's Association, Kieran Donnelly, on the way. Got a few more minutes to spend with Canyon County Sheriff Kieran Donnelly, and he's also, or Donahue rather, excuse me. I have a lot of Irish people coming through my studio, and so I should point out to the sheriff too that I have grandparents, one whose family came from Galway and the others from Roscommon. I should be able to get this straight. It's 22 minutes. 22 minutes after 8 o'clock.
You never know.
It's 61. And we're talking about the new trespass law in the state of Idaho. Bill Colley with you on Magic Valley this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Well, their names are Colley's fairly easy, and so is Fahey. So the little shorter. I can't get beyond 2 syllables. I'm still working on that. We were talking off air about a couple of things, too, that you wanted to bring up. And one was, by the way, that the law can mislead people because there's a description about entering or that they entered the property or remaining on the property. And it's not clear, I guess, between those two descriptions what exactly the law means.
Well, there's that. It's in the law. A person commits criminal trespass if they enter or remain on another person's property. Well, do you commit the crime by entering, or do you commit the crime by remaining? And that's unclear language. So, but that's in law. So now the officer is going to have to work that out. And again, it goes back to that innocent behavior of someone retrieving a pet or something from another person's property. The other first thing about it is, this written permission or written document that the law requires. You could have the landowner's signature, the name of the person giving permission, etc., the dates, the general description of the property. And when we pointed out the difficulty of using written permission slips, then the sponsors of the bill said, well, then maybe another form of permission or invitation recognized by law. Well, what the hell is that? What is that? Is that an attorney language? Is it recognized by law? It's the indiscrepancies, and we don't. And how are we going to figure that out? And then if this person's charged, that's going to be up to the prosecuting attorney to file the charges. We may bring the charges forward, but that's going to be up to the prosecuting attorney to go forward with that. And I think one of the other things we talked about with the concerns we have, and especially up in places like Valley County, where you've got large tract of landowner by the brothers out of Texas who own a large amount of land up there, are hiring armed guards to traverse the roadways and monitor their property. But unfortunately for the general citizen, and there's documentation to show this, where they're stopping or having contact with innocent individuals who are simply traversing Forest Service roads. Those are public roads. That's not private property, and yet they're being harassed by these individuals saying, well, you're trespassing on our land. No, they're not trespassing on land. They're driving down a Forest Service road, which they have every single right to do so. When you have an armed guard doing that, making those encounters, nothing but bad is going to happen down the road on that.
And I think temper's obviously going to start flaring at some point, and that's even worse for people who actually have to enforce the law.
It really is. Because then put yourself in a law enforcement officer's shoes when he or she arrives in that scene, and everybody's got guns. Then what's going to happen? Because you've got this person who is not a law enforcement officer but is an armed security guard. That does not give them police powers, and so you could, and I'm talking hypothetical situation, obviously, but you have an individual who is armed with a gun because A, we have open carry in this state, and B, they may be out there hunting, and tempers do tend to flare, especially when you've been stopped illegally and by a person who has no authority to stop you, or who is telling you that they have the authority and they do not. It is just wrought with danger. I'm very concerned about it. The other sheriffs are concerned about it. I think it's going to be more emphasized in some areas more than others. But I'm telling you, that's one of my concerns, one of my many concerns.
You'd mentioned before we even were on the air today, too, that this is a nightmare for Idaho Fish and Game as well.
Well, I think the poor fish and game officers are going to have their hands full on this. The wonderful men and women of fish and game, I mean, they're out there doing their job. They're commissioned officers. They go through the academy just like we do, post-academy. And they're strung few and far between out there. So, of course, they rely on law enforcement to back them up and to help them out, and vice versa. We do the same with them. And this is going to put them in some pretty tough spots out there trying to keep the peace and enforce fish and wildlife, our game laws, etc. And really what we're all out there for is to hopefully help people enjoy the great outdoors of Idaho. And unfortunately, I think this thing is going to disrupt that in a fashion that we certainly don't want.
It's 8:27. We've got a couple of minutes left with Sheriff Kieran Donahue from Canyon County, and of course he's also president of the Idaho Sheriff's Association. Bill Colley with you on Magic Valley this morning on KLIX, and we're at 63. Hey, quickly too, since you brought the fact that no one wanted to consult law enforcement on this law, I heard from someone the other day that the law enforcers who have to do a lot of the work on the interstates believe that they weren't consulted as well about the slow driver law, or however you want to describe that. It seems that there's a pattern going on here where law enforcement is just being consistently overlooked.
That's a very interesting point, and you're most likely talking about Idaho State Police, because they do the bulk of the amount of enforcement on our freeways and highways. the trend has been that, in my opinion, and I'm on the legislative committee as well for the Idaho Sheriff's Association. And the fact is, I think we're hopefully starting to change that situation of being left out. We are adamantly arguing our cases in front of the legislative body, and I think that there again is the peril of not involving law enforcement. And for whatever reason, whenever that started, where we started to be left out of those conversations, I can't pinpoint when that started, but it certainly does exist. Make no mistake about it. It has existed. It does exist. And we are trying very vehemently to switch that and let the legislative body understand you need to involve not just the Sheriff's Association, but the Chiefs of Police Association without question. These are the men and women who set policy and who enforce the law. And this has to be a team effort. You can't just have people at the legislative level making all these decisions without discussing them with our law enforcement bodies.
Well, Sheriff Donahue, I want to thank you much for your time this morning. And when we get a resolution on this, we'd love to have you back on the air.
Well, I hope we do get a resolution to it, and I appreciate the invitation, and we'll certainly do so. And I hope that the legislative body takes this very seriously this upcoming session, and what amendments can be made are made.
Well, again, thank you, and have a great day, sir.
Thank you very much, Bill. You too.
Kieran Donahue was the sheriff of Canyon County, Idaho, also the president of the Idaho Sheriff's Association, spending some time with us this morning talking about his concerns, and there's some important ones with the state's new trespass law. Do want to point out, coming up after the news at 9 o'clock this morning, we expect to be joined by state legislator, state representative Dorothy Moon. She's going to be talking about dealings she has with the Forest Service that could help perhaps reduce the volume of forest fires in Idaho. It's 62. Bill Colley with you until 10 a.m. on Magic Valley this morning.